The fluorescent lights hum at 300 Hz, a frequency that most people stop hearing after about 30 seconds. Brooke Sullivan hears it every shift. It's the sound of something dying very slowly, and she's learned to work beneath it the way a musician ignores the drone of the air conditioning unit. The smell of antiseptic masks something underneath, copper and old sweat, and the particular staleness of a place where people come to receive bad news. She's standing at the pediatric station on the 3rd floor of Seattle General in San Diego, checking the vitals on 8-year-old Ethan Harris, when Dr. Caldwell walks past without looking at her. He doesn't look at her because, in his estimation, she isn't worth looking at. She's been here 3 months. She has no publication history, no connected family, no pedigree. She's just another civilian nurse who stumbled into pediatrics the way people stumble into most places, through application and luck and the kind of steady competence that institutions like Seattle General consider interchangeable. What Dr. Caldwell sees when he finally does glance at her is a woman in her early 40s with careful hands and a way of moving that suggests she's thinking 3 steps ahead of wherever her body is. He decides, in that glance, that this is a challenge to the hierarchy he's spent 23 years constructing. The ER at Seattle General belongs to Dr. Caldwell the way a medieval castle belongs to its lord. He decides who practices surgery there. He decides who advances. He decides who stays. Brooke doesn't notice his assessment because she's focused on Ethan's chart, on the neurological symptoms that began 3 weeks ago, tremors, subtle at first, then worsening. Deaf since birth, so he can't tell the medical team where the pain is. Can't describe the pressure building in his skull. Commander Harris brought him in yesterday morning, and the specialists have been cycling through since then, offering increasingly urgent diagnoses that don't quite fit: early-stage hydrocephalus, possible metabolic encephalopathy, pseudotumor cerebri. Nothing lands. Ethan's MRI came back with abnormalities that no one can quite explain, a shadow in the brainstem that radiologists keep describing as unusual but indeterminate. Brooke has read the chart 4 times. She knows it better than the attending does. The lunchroom at Seattle General has a vending machine that dispenses something called cream of broccoli soup from a machine that hasn't been cleaned since the Obama administration. There's a microwave that hums like it's been possessed by something mildly inconvenienced. Brooke is carrying her tray, brown rice, grilled chicken, the kind of meal that tastes like discipline, when Dr. Caldwell passes her in the aisle. He doesn't so much knock the tray out of her hands as let his shoulder make a decision that his conscious mind has already made. The tray tips. The brown rice scatters across the tile floor like 1,000 tiny accusations. The water bottle clatters. The plastic dish spins twice and comes to rest against the far wall. The room goes very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone sees something they're going to talk about later. Brooke sets the empty tray down on the nearest table. She bends to retrieve the pieces of her lunch without changing her expression, without that sharp intake of breath that would give him something to work with. Her jaw moves slightly, once, like she's examining something unpleasant on her tongue. That's all. She collects the rice in her palm. She finds the scattered pieces of chicken. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't explain. She moves like someone who has cleaned up worse things in worse places, and the muscle memory of that work is just beneath her skin, waiting to be recognized by someone who knows what to look for. Dr. Caldwell watches her and finds himself oddly unsatisfied with this response. He expected something different. He expected the kind of reaction that would have justified the action: reddening, trembling, some visible disturbance in the composure that would prove she didn't belong here. Instead, he got a jaw clench and steady hands and a woman who finished her work as if he hadn't just tried to break something inside her. But the day is long, and he has time. 14 minutes later, Brooke is walking down the hallway on the 3rd floor with a patient chart, the Harris file, actually, the one she's been worrying over. She's turning toward the pediatric intensive care unit, thinking about the symptoms, thinking about the imaging, thinking about what might be happening in that child's brainstem that no one else has seen yet. Dr. Caldwell steps out of a supply closet with the chart still in his hand, as if he's been waiting. He throws it. Not drops it. Throws it. The file arcs through the air and lands at Brooke's feet with a sound like breaking wings. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he says. The words hang in the corridor. There are other people passing, a resident, 2 nurses, an orderly pushing a medication cart, and every single one of them stops moving for a fraction of a second. The hallway tiles are the color of old bone. The fluorescent lights buzz their low drone. Somewhere on the 2nd floor, someone is calling a code, but up here, everything is very still. Brooke looks at the chart. She looks at Dr. Caldwell. There's no emotion in her face, nothing that gives him access. She doesn't do what he's waiting for, doesn't speak, doesn't cry, doesn't offer the kind of emotional response that would allow him to call this correction instead of humiliation. Instead, she bends down, her movements deliberate and controlled, and retrieves the file from the floor. Her fingers are steady on the manila folder. Her hands don't shake. She doesn't shake. She's wearing long sleeves despite the San Diego heat, and the fabric pulls slightly as she bends, revealing something beneath the cuff, not quite a scar, but the suggestion of one, old and faded, and the kind of mark that doesn't come from stumbling into furniture or surgical accidents. She straightens. She holds the chart against her chest. "I need to review Ethan's imaging," she says, and her voice is the same tone it always is, neutral, practical, the voice of someone describing a procedure to another medical professional. No inflection. No break. No crack in the surface that would give him anything to hold onto. She walks past him, and the hallway begins to move again, the orderly pushing his cart, the nurses resuming their conversations, the resident pretending he didn't see anything because looking is dangerous in hospital hierarchies, and seeing means you might have to take sides. Dr. Caldwell stands alone for a moment, and his jaw tightens in a way that mirrors Brooke's, but where hers was control, his is fury at not having control. That night, Brooke's apartment is small and very clean. There are no photographs on the walls. There is no art. There are books, medical texts, history, a few novels she reads in the dark when she can't sleep, but nothing personal, nothing that suggests anyone's specific lives here. She keeps the place the way a person keeps a hotel room, occupied but uninhabited. Her daughter is asleep in the bedroom down the hall. A school project sits half-finished on the kitchen table, a diorama about the California gold rush, construction paper mountains, little wooden figures representing miners. Brooke opens the closet and pulls out the bottom drawer, the one hidden beneath the folded towels and extra blankets. Inside, wrapped in plastic that's turned cloudy with age, are a pair of combat boots. Bates brand, the lace is still threaded through the eyelets the way soldiers leave them, the leather creased and stained with sand that comes from a particular place in Anbar province. The tread on the soles is worn down almost to smooth in places where weight was distributed unequally, a limp, years old, from a wound that healed improperly because there was no time to treat it properly. She unwraps the plastic carefully, though there's no one here to see. The smell that comes out is mineral and distant, desert dust and old metal and gun oil, a time capsule of a life that officially never happened. She holds the boots in both hands. They're heavier than you'd think, or maybe she just remembers them as heavier. She sits on the edge of her bed in the dark, and for exactly 1 minute, she counts it, the way she counts everything, she lets the weight of them pull her down. She thinks about Ramadi. She thinks about a particular night in March when the operation went sideways and the extraction point changed and she carried a Marine through enemy fire for 2 miles with a sucking chest wound because he was going to die otherwise and she wasn't going to let him. She thinks about the way his blood got mixed with her blood and the sand got into everything and the Pentagon called her a ghost afterward, erased her records, told her to disappear because officially that operation never happened and she didn't exist and neither did the Marine she saved. 1 minute. That's all she allows. Then she wraps the boots back in the plastic, careful, deliberate. She tucks them back under the towels. She closes the closet door. She locks away the part of herself that carried a man through hell, and she locks away the part that remembers what she was capable of, and she locks away the part that might be dangerous if allowed to surface in a place like Seattle General where Dr. Caldwell thinks he knows who holds the power. She walks into the kitchen and finishes the Gold Rush diorama. She glues down the final miner. She paints his face. She is patient and steady and entirely present for this small task, and no one would know, watching her work, that anything in her had just broken and reformed into something different. Brooke works the security route sometimes, knows the guard who walks the hallways at night, the one with the faded tattoo on his neck that says Remedy 2009. She's passed him 17 times in 3 months. He's always professional, always respectful to the nurses, always careful to move out of the way with that particular kind of awareness that men who've been in theater carry with them forever. She recognized him the first day she arrived at Seattle General. She saw his face and knew that on a particular night in March, when an operation went sideways and the extraction point changed, she'd grabbed his body armor and hauled him up and started running through enemy fire with his arm across her shoulders and his weight making her leg buckle but her hands refusing to let go. He doesn't recognize her. That's the thing she didn't anticipate, though she should have. Master Chief Petty Officer Sullivan doesn't exist anymore. That rank, that name, that identity, all of it was erased like it was written in pencil. The woman who carried him through Remedy is officially not a person. So when he passes her in the hallway, he nods the way he nods at all the nurses, respectful and distant, and he has no idea that the quiet woman in the long sleeves is the reason he's still breathing, the reason he gets to work security at a hospital in San Diego, the reason he gets to wake up in the morning at all. This is something Brooke has learned to live with. This invisibility. This erasure. This walking through a world where one person sees you and the next person doesn't, where your greatest act of sacrifice means nothing to the person you sacrificed for because they've been told you never existed at all. She walks past him in the hallway on the way to check on Ethan Harris, and she doesn't acknowledge him either, because that's the agreement, that's the understanding, that's the cost of disappearing. The hallway outside Ethan Harris's room smells like antiseptic and something else underneath it, the sharp metallic tang of fear that parents give off when their children are dying. Brooke passes Marcus Webb near the supply station without looking at him, and he doesn't look at her either, which is exactly how it has to be. 2 years of passing in corridors, 2 years of him walking 3 feet away from the woman whose tattoo he carries on his right forearm, and neither of them acknowledges the ghost between them. That's the price of disappearing. That's the agreement written in classified redactions and sealed Pentagon documents that no longer exist. Commander Harris sits in the waiting area outside Trauma Bay 3, dress uniform immaculate, posture rigid, hands gripping the armrests of a plastic chair like he's holding a rope suspended over an abyss. His 8-year-old son Ethan is in that room, and something is wrong in a way that doesn't have a name yet. Brooke had noticed it during Ethan's initial admission 3 days ago, the subtle changes in his neurological responses, the way his eyes tracked a light source just half a second slower than they should, the barely perceptible tremor in his left hand. She'd written it in her notes, possible brainstem inflammation. Possible CNS compression. Recommend neurology consult and imaging. Dr. Caldwell had dismissed her during morning rounds that same day. His voice carried across the entire pod, residents, attending physicians, nurses, anyone with ears. That's an interesting theory, Nurse Sullivan, he'd said, each word dripping with a kind of condescension that made medical students look at their shoes. Did you get your medical degree from Google University, or was it a correspondence course? The residents laughed the nervous laugh of people who'd learned to laugh when the alpha predator laughed. Brooke's jaw had tightened microscopically. Her hands had remained perfectly steady as she closed the chart. She'd been trained by the best combat medics in the world, had saved lives in places where the sand still had bullet holes in it, and she was being corrected about basic neurological symptoms by a man whose greatest accomplishment was cultivating 20 years of hospital politics. Tell you what, sweetheart, Caldwell had continued, stepping closer in that way designed to invade space and establish dominance. I'll make this easy for you. You find anything wrong with that Harris kid that I missed, I'll buy you dinner. He'd smiled like a wolf. But when you don't, you quit. 1 week. Deal. He'd extended his hand mockingly. She'd looked at that hand for 3 seconds, 3 full seconds of silence that made everyone in the room uncomfortable, then walked past him without a word to continue her rounds. The bet had hung in the air like humidity before a storm. That was 72 hours ago. 2 days later, the cafeteria during lunch rush was a chaos of trays and voices and the fluorescent lights humming their endless mechanical drone. Brooke sat alone at a corner table, sandwich, apple, black coffee, reviewing Ethan's latest lab results on her phone screen. The report showed nothing definitive. Everything normal. Everything clean. Which meant either the inflammation was still in its early stages or it was something else entirely, something rarer that required looking beyond the standard panels, beyond what the protocols told you to see. She was so focused on the numbers that she didn't register Dr. Caldwell approaching until her entire lunch tray exploded across the floor. He'd accidentally knocked it with his elbow as he passed her table. The sandwich landed face down. The apple rolled under a neighboring chair. Coffee splashed across her scrubs in a spreading dark stain. 40 people went silent. The room held its breath like a predator recognizing another predator. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Caldwell had said, voice perfectly flat, perfectly not sorry. "You really should be more careful where you sit, Sullivan. This section is usually reserved for medical staff." He'd smiled. That smile contained everything he needed to say about what she was to him. Brooke had stared at the mess for 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. Then she'd gotten napkins from the dispenser, methodical, precise, her movements the muscle memory of 1,000 early mornings cleaning weapons and field equipment. She'd wiped the coffee from her scrubs. Collected every piece of food from the tile floor. Thrown the trash away. Skipped lunch. Returned to her shift as if her stomach wasn't cramping, as if there wasn't a red stain on her white scrubs that looked like a wound. That evening, Dr. Caldwell had thrown a patient chart at her feet outside the supply room. Just threw it. Papers scattered across the tile like leaves. 2 nurses and an orderly watched in stunned silence. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he'd said, his voice loud enough for the entire hallway to hear. "And maybe read it this time before you waste everyone's time with your paramedic-level observations." Brooke's hands had clenched once at her sides, that single visible crack in her armor, and then she'd bent smoothly and collected every page with mechanical precision, organizing them in perfect order before placing the chart back in his hands. Her voice had been so quiet that only he could hear it. "Vitals on the Harris boy are declining," she'd said. "Someone should check on him." Caldwell had smirked. "Someone with actual medical training will handle it. You just keep the bedpans clean." He'd walked away. Now, 30 hours later, alarms are screaming from Ethan Harris's room at 2:48 p.m. on a Wednesday that nobody will ever forget. Brooke's phone is in her hand 1 second and on the floor the next because she's already running, already moving toward the sound of that alarm the way a fighter jet responds to a scramble order. The code overhead crackles, pediatric critical, trauma bay 3, and her body is already in motion before her brain has finished catching up. Ethan is seizing. His body convulsing against the hospital bed like electricity is running through him. His eyes are rolled back so far that only the whites are visible. His mother is in the hallway screaming. His father, Commander Harris, stands frozen in the corner of the room in his dress blues, watching his deaf son's life short-circuit, and his face has turned the color of wet chalk. The resident on duty, a young man named Dr. Patterson, is standing with his hands hovering uselessly 3 inches above the patient's chest. He's frozen. His mouth is opening and closing like a fish trying to breathe in reverse. "Get the crash cart," Brooke says. It's not a request. It's a command that comes from somewhere deeper than nursing school, from a place that remembers how to triage in combat zones where the supply chain doesn't exist and you work with what you have in front of you. Now. 14-gauge angiocath. Midline placement. Move. Patterson snaps to motion like he's been physically jolted. Brooke checks Ethan's airway, clear, and positions him on his side because seizure protocol demands it, because aspiration kills as surely as the underlying cause. The boy's body is rigid, tremoring, his muscles locked in sustained contraction. His oxygen saturation is 71%. Falling. What's the seizure history? She's already reaching for the intubation kit because she knows what she's going to find in the scans, what Caldwell was too arrogant to look for 3 days ago. Brainstem swelling. CNS compression. Not an inflammatory response. Something rarer. Something that responds to pressure relief and decompression. No prior seizures, Patterson stammers. First presentation. BP is 156/94. HR 188. Get neurology on the phone. Tell them I need a stat CT with contrast. Brooke's hands are moving with the terrible fluid precision of someone who has prepared for exactly this moment for 22 years. And tell them to expect brainstem compression. Rare hemangiosarcoma variant. I'm going to need someone who knows how to manage hemorrhage in the fourth ventricle. How do you know that? Patterson's voice cracks slightly. Because she looked closer than you did, a voice says from the doorway. It's Marcus Webb, the security guard, limping toward them with something that isn't quite panic in his eyes. You need anything, I can get it faster than the cart. Brooke doesn't acknowledge him. Can't acknowledge him. The agreement is still in effect. The disappearance is still complete. The seizure breaks after 97 seconds. Ethan's body goes slack, and for a moment there's only the sound of his breathing, ragged, uneven, the sound of a child's lungs catching up after drowning in electricity. His oxygen saturation climbs to 74%. Then 76. Then plateaus at 78 and won't go higher. Commander Harris moves from the corner of the room to his son's bedside without being told. His hand finds Ethan's hair and strokes it once, twice, the gesture of a man who has learned in 8 years of deafness that touch is the only language his son can always hear. What just happened to my son? His voice is steady now. Military. A commander of men seeking a situation report from someone who actually knows the tactical situation instead of the theoretical one. Brooke finishes securing the 4-line, smooth, practiced, the needle going through subclavian skin with the precision of someone who has done this 800 times. Your son is seizing because there's pressure building in his brainstem. Not inflammation. Compression. A vascular malformation that's been bleeding slowly for the past 72 hours. She meets his eyes for exactly 1 second. Dr. Caldwell didn't look for it. I did. The room goes so quiet you can hear the fluorescent lights humming their electronic prayer. The 4 is in. The crash cart is here. Patterson is on the phone with neurology, stammering something about hemorrhage and decompression, and the nurse thinks it might be a vascular anomaly. And somewhere in that silence, something shifts. The commander sees her clearly for the first time, not as a civilian nurse who wandered into the ER with a lucky guess, but as something else entirely. Something trained. Something that moves like a person who has made life and death decisions under fire. He doesn't say anything. Doesn't need to. Ethan goes rigid on the bed at 2:13 in the afternoon, his small body seizing with the violence of someone being electrocuted from inside. His back arches. His eyes roll backward until only the whites show. The heart monitor screams its alarm, a sound like a fire engine trapped in a metal box. Brooke is 8 feet away, charting vital signs from the previous patient. She hears the first tremor, that sick, wet sound of a child's throat closing, and her body moves before her mind catches up. Combat taught her that reaction speed matters more than permission. Seizure activity, she calls, already moving toward the bed. Ethan, can you hear me? She knows he can't. His body has been hijacked by something firing in his skull like artillery. The decompression she warned about. The inflammation Caldwell dismissed with a public laugh in front of a dozen staff members. 2 nurses appear at the doorway, younger, uncertain. They've seen seizures before, but this one has a particular violence to it, a child's body thrashing like something is trying to claw its way out. One of them fumbles for the crash cart. Commander Harris stands frozen beside the bed, watching his son convulse. His hands open and close. Open and close. His mouth forms words that don't come out. This is a man trained to make split-second decisions under fire, and he is utterly helpless. Stay with me, Brooke says to the commander, her voice steady as a surgical laser. She's already moving the bed away from the wall, clearing the seizure space. Her hands position Ethan's head, not restraining, never restraining, turning him to the side so if he vomits, his airway stays clear. She's done this 1,000 times in 1,000 variations. In Ramadi, Outside the wire, with a 19-year-old Marine whose Humvee hit an IED and whose brain was swelling inside his skull because there was no neurosurgeon within 200 miles. "Get me 5 milligrams lorazepam 4, she says. Not requests. Commands. The younger nurses move. The seizure lasts 43 seconds, she counts them in her head without thinking about it, and then it stops. But the pause that follows is worse than the seizure. Ethan's breathing becomes shallow. Labored. His lips are the color of storm clouds. Dr. Caldwell arrives like a storm front, his footsteps loud on the tile. He takes in the scene, the seizing patient, the monitors screaming, the father's broken expression, and something in his face tightens. This is his moment to prove he was right. To prove Brooke was wrong. "Everyone back," he orders, pushing past her. His voice carries the weight of 17 years as chief of pediatrics. "I need the intubation kit. Now." Brooke steps back. Professional. Compliant. Just a nurse. But she watches his hands when he opens the kit, and she sees what everyone else misses. The tremor. Barely visible. The kind of shaking that happens when a surgeon has never actually done emergency field work, only read case studies in journals while sitting behind a mahogany desk. Caldwell reaches for the endotracheal tube. Ethan's oxygen saturation is dropping. 92%. 88%. 84%. The monitor beeps faster. Caldwell's hands work through the intubation, and he gets the tube in, good placement, proper depth, but something is wrong. The pressure in Ethan's skull isn't responding to the standard protocols. Brooke can see it in the child's pupil dilation, in the motor response deteriorating further. "His pupils are blown," she says quietly. Not a question. A statement of fact. "I'm aware," Caldwell snaps, but his voice has lost its arrogance. It's been replaced with something thinner. Fear. Ethan's oxygen saturation drops to 78%. Commander Harris makes a sound like an animal caught in a trap. "Do something. My son is dying." Caldwell calls for imaging, neurological consult, emergency labs. All the right words. All the standard moves. But Brooke knows, the way she knows her own blood type, the way she knows the sound of a helicopter before it arrives, that none of it will work fast enough. Brain pressure this severe doesn't wait for a neurologist to walk across the hospital. It kills children in the time it takes to make a phone call. She sees what Caldwell can't see because he's never been in a bombed-out school building in Ramadi with a Marine whose skull was crushed by shrapnel and a pressure cooker of a skull and only her hands between him and death. He needs emergency cranial decompression, Brooke says. Her voice is quiet. Clinical. The voice of someone stating an obvious fact. Right now. Caldwell's head snaps toward her. His eyes flash with something that might be rage or might be recognition that she's right. "You are a nurse. Stand back and let me work." But his hands are shaking as he fumbles with the next medication. His jaw is tight. He's frozen in the way people freeze when they're trying to remember something they read in medical school but never actually performed. The way people freeze when they realize that knowing something and doing something are two entirely different skills. Commander Harris sees it. The father sees the man in charge failing his son. "Help him." The commander's voice breaks. "Someone help my son." Brooke moves. Not asking. Not requesting. Just moving with the muscle memory of someone who has drilled holes through human bone with a hand crank while mortar shells landed outside the walls. Who has opened chests and held hearts in her hands? Who has performed emergency decompression in sewage-flooded basement hospitals with nothing but field medicine and absolute focus? She pushes past Caldwell, not roughly, just aside, and grabs the emergency surgical kit. Her hands are steady. Steady like the hands belong to someone else, someone from a life she doesn't claim anymore. She locates the burr points on Ethan's small skull, the landmarks she learned from anatomy and combat reinforced them 1,000 times. She doesn't announce what she's doing. Caldwell knows. Everyone knows. The handheld drill whines to life in her grip. 1 burr hole. 2 burr holes. The bone dust rises like snow. The pressure releases with a sound like air escaping from a tire. Ethan's body goes limp, not arrest, but pressure relief. His pupils contract. His breathing deepens. The heart monitor finds its rhythm. Steady. Predictable. Alive. The room goes silent except for the ventilator's mechanical breathing and the steady beep. 1, 2, 3. Each beep a small miracle. Each beep a child who is still here. Commander Harris is crying. Not trying to hide it. Just standing there, tears on his face, watching his deaf son's chest rise and fall. Rise and fall. Dr. Caldwell stands against the far wall, face the color of hospital walls. He's watching a civilian nurse accomplish in 90 seconds what he couldn't accomplish with his credentials and his authority and 17 years of institutional power. Brooke is already documenting the procedure in the medical record. Her handwriting is perfect. Clinical. The writing of someone trained to communicate across miles of enemy territory with precision that meant life or death. She uses the proper terminology. Emergency cranial decompression via bilateral burr placement. Pressure relief at approximately 200 milliliters of cerebrospinal fluid. Pupil response normalized. Vital signs stabilized. She documents that she did it. She documents the end of her career. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came later, when she realized that Dr. Caldwell, standing against that wall with his white face and his shaking hands, was already calculating how to make this go away. How to bury what she'd just done. How to protect his reputation from the stain of being outperformed by someone he'd spent weeks trying to destroy. Brooke finishes the chart entry. She steps back from the bed. She watches Commander Harris hold his son's hand, watches the father say silent prayers in the language of someone who has survived impossible things. And she knows, with the absolute clarity of someone who has already survived everything, that the hospital will not let this stand. Within 2 hours of Ethan Harris regaining consciousness, Dr. Caldwell moved with the precision of a surgeon plotting an incision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power, he'd learned 34 years ago during his first week as an attending, wasn't about volume, it was about networks, and networks were patients weaponized. His first call came at 3:08 p.m. Patricia Dennison, member of the hospital board, had a grandson. A boy who'd come in with acute appendicitis 5 years ago, and it was Dr. Caldwell who'd caught the complications, who'd prevented sepsis, who'd made sure the thank you flowers arrived at his office every Christmas since. Patricia answered on the second ring. Patricia. I need to discuss a liability issue at Seattle General. A nurse, no credentials, performing surgical procedures she has no training for. Open chest procedures. On a Marine's child. We're talking exposure here. Real exposure. His words were careful. Precise. He didn't say Brooke's name. He didn't need to. He said young, ambitious, emotional instability, and employment gaps. He said, the kind of thing that makes insurance carriers nervous. He let Patricia connect the dots, and Patricia's silence told him she understood the implications before he'd even finished. The second call came at 4:12 p.m. Brooke's previous hospital in Portland, where she'd worked for 3 years before vanishing into civilian life at Seattle General. The human resources director there was Dr. Caldwell's college roommate, a detail he'd held in reserve, like a playing card kept close to the chest. He framed his questions carefully, just doing our due diligence on a recent hire. You had her for 3 years? Any gaps in employment history? Emotional stability issues? We're seeing some concerning behavioral patterns. The HR director, Terry Hutchins, hesitated. I can't really discuss. Of course. But between us, anything I should be aware of? Personnel issues? Erratic behavior? Unexplained absences? The pause stretched. That pause was enough. Caldwell had planted the seed, and seeds grew best in soil of doubt. The third move came at 4:51 p.m. An external investigator named Richard Torres, the kind of man who billed by the hour and didn't ask uncomfortable questions if the check cleared. Caldwell had Torres's number in his phone under contingencies. Torres had audited 6 other nurses over the past decade, and 4 of them had resigned before the process finished. The outcome was predictable. "I need a comprehensive chart review," Caldwell told him. "Everything she's touched in the past 3 months. Any deviation from protocol, any documentation error, any unauthorized medication administration. I don't care how small. I want it catalogued and cross-referenced. This is about patient safety and institutional liability." Torres didn't ask who she was. Torres never asked. Torres just said, 48 hours, and hung up. By 5:19 p.m., Brooke was called into administration on the 2nd floor. The room smelled like old carpet and the kind of antiseptic that covered up years of difficult conversations. 3 people sat across from her, the chief nursing officer, the hospital's risk manager, and Patricia Dennison herself, whose grandson's medical crisis had brought Caldwell exactly this moment. The CNO didn't meet her eyes. Risk manager had a folder thick enough to suggest preparation. Patricia looked at her watch. "Ms. Sullivan," the risk manager began, "we've received concerning information about procedures you performed this morning that fall outside your scope of practice. Specifically, an emergency bilateral burr hole decompression without physician oversight, authorization, or documented supervision." Brooke's hand sat flat on the table. "Steady." The child was seizing. Dr. Caldwell was not responding to emergency protocols. "Which is precisely the point," Patricia said quietly. "You are a nurse. You are not qualified to make that determination. This hospital has invested significant resources in your employment, and we need to understand how this breach of protocol occurred." "The child is alive," Brooke said. 4 words. They hung in the air like a challenge. "Yes," the CNO said carefully. "And we're grateful for that. But procedure exists for reasons. We've brought in an independent investigator to review your employment record. Until that review is complete, your hospital credentials are suspended, effective immediately." The risk manager slid a folder across the table. "Termination hearing notice. Friday 8:38 a.m. Conference room A. You'll be notified of the findings within 72 hours, the CNO said. You're free to bring representation to the hearing if you choose." Brooke looked at the folder. Looked at Patricia's face, not unkind, just following protocol, just doing her job. She'd heard that phrase so many times in her life that it had stopped meaning anything. She stood. Didn't touch the folder. "Am I dismissed?" They exchanged a look. The CNO nodded. Brooke walked out of that room the way she'd walked out of every debriefing, every investigation, every moment where civilians tried to make sense of decisions that could only be understood in the seconds when a child was dying and you had 90 seconds to move or watch him go. She'd performed open-chest direct cardiac massage on a man while bullets hit the concrete 6 inches from her head. A suspension notice wasn't fear. It was just noise. But the drive home was quiet in a way that made her hands shake for the first time in 3 months. She made it to her kitchen at 2:04 p.m. on a Tuesday, still in her scrubs, still smelling like the hospital antiseptic that never quite washed out of your skin. Her daughter Mia was there at the kitchen table, home early from school, some teacher workday, some admin thing Brooke had forgotten about, and Mia looked up from her math homework with the particular radar children develop for their parents' disasters. Mia was 10. She had her mother's dark hair and her mother's 2 observant eyes, and she'd learned not to ask questions when Brooke came home with that particular expression on her face, the one that meant something had broken and wasn't going to be fixed by morning. Except Mia asked anyway. Children always asked anyway. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Brooke's hand went to her face. She hadn't realized. Tears were there, on her cheeks, the first ones in so long that her face didn't quite know how to process them. She sat down at the table like her legs had stopped trusting her. How do you tell a 10-year-old that you don't officially exist? That the government had erased the rank you'd earned, the medals you'd survived, the 2 miles you'd carried a dying man through enemy fire because someone had to and you were the someone. That you'd changed your name, changed your history, walked away from every identity you'd built because an operation had gone sideways and there were witnesses and the Pentagon's solution was to make you disappear. How do you tell your daughter that you'd saved a child's life today and they were going to destroy you for it? You don't. You pull her into your arms at the kitchen table and you lie the way you've lied every single day since you stopped existing. Just a hard day, baby. Just a hard day. Mia's arms came around her mother's shoulders, small and solid, the way children's love always is, uncomplicated and terrifying in its faith that you will somehow survive whatever is breaking you. She pressed her face against Brooke's neck and didn't ask more questions, because she understood, on some level below language, that her mother was running out of answers. Brooke's phone buzzed against the table. The formal termination hearing notice. Friday morning. Seattle General, Conference Room A, bring representation. Hospital will present findings at that time. Her employment status remains suspended pending outcome. She closed her eyes while Mia held her at the kitchen table, while the afternoon light shifted through the windows like slow artillery, while somewhere in the city a boy she'd saved was waking up and learning to see the world again through eyes that would never hear it. The hearing room smelled like old carpet and institutional fear. 40 people filled the conference table and lined the walls, hospital administrators in pressed suits, board members checking their phones, security guards stationed by both exits like they were preparing for a riot instead of a termination meeting. The fluorescent lights hummed their relentless drone overhead. Brooke sat in the metal chair at the center of the table, her hands folded on the laminate surface, her posture perfect. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived places where the walls bled. Dr. Caldwell sat 3 seats to her left, his expression oscillating between confidence and something that looked almost like hunger. He'd already won. The external investigator's report was in front of everyone, 17 pages documenting alleged procedural violations, scope creep, unauthorized invasive techniques. All of it buried in enough medical jargon to obscure the truth: she'd saved a child's life and he couldn't forgive her for it. The hospital's legal counsel was beginning the formal statement when the conference room doors opened. Commander Harris walked in supporting a man whose left leg was wrapped in fresh gauze, whose face carried the weathered geometry of someone who'd survived things that left marks. An Iraqi translator. Seeking asylum. The man moved slowly, carefully, his eyes adjusting to the fluorescent brightness of the room. Then his gaze found Brooke and his entire body went rigid. He spoke a single word in Arabic, his voice cracking with the weight of it. Malak. Angel. The room didn't understand. But Brooke did. She'd heard that word once before, shouted across a killing zone in Ramadi while rounds tore through a wall 2 inches from her head. She'd heard it when she dragged this man, then a terrified insurgent intelligence asset, through sand and smoke for 2 miles toward extraction. She'd heard it as the word for what she was to him: not a soldier, not American, not a woman. An angel. A force that had come through fire and pulled him alive. The interpreter's hands were shaking. That was when Marcus Webb, the veteran security guard who'd passed Brooke in hospital hallways for 3 months without recognition, went completely still. His face had gone pale. His eyes moved to Brooke and something in his expression shifted, a door opening in a locked room. He stepped forward. His voice carried through the conference room like a salute. Master Chief Petty Officer Sullivan. His posture straightened. His hand moved to his chest in a gesture that transcended security guard protocol, that belonged to a different hierarchy entirely. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Dr. Caldwell's face registered the first tremor of understanding. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled against the table. Commander Harris turned to the hospital administrator. I need her file. Everything. Now. The administrator looked at the legal counsel. The legal counsel looked at the door. Nobody moved. 53 minutes later, a 2-star general walked into the conference room like someone accustomed to spaces reorganizing themselves around his presence. His dress uniform was sharp enough to cut glass. His name was Kensington and he'd served with the 160th Saw Night Stalkers for 31 years. He moved directly to the center of the table and opened a folder that was not hospital property. He read Brooke's commendations aloud. Bronze Star Favela. Fallujah, 2007. He paused. A half-second. Bronze Star Favela. Sanjin Valley, 2009. Another pause, longer this time. The Weight Building. Silver Star for Extraordinary Heroism in Direct Combat. Jolin District, 2006. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And 17 confirmed combat saves. 17 Marines who are alive because this woman pulled them through hell. The room held its breath. General Kensington closed the folder with a sound like a gavel. 10 full seconds passed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the ventilator wheeze coming from the hallway, the ambient hospital respiration that never stopped. Then the general turned to Dr. Caldwell. "You are fired." Caldwell's face went the color of old bone. "You can't, I've been here 23 years, I have board approval, I have authority." "You have none," Kensington said. His voice was the sound of a tank engine idling in a concrete garage, low, resonant, absolutely unstoppable. "You nearly killed a Marine's dependent through negligence. You harassed a decorated service member. You attempted to destroy her career to cover your own incompetence. Security will escort you out. You will not practice medicine in any facility with military contracts or federal funding. That is every major hospital in this region. Am I clear?" Caldwell tried to speak. The words died in his throat. Security moved forward. Marcus Webb was among them, his prosthetic hand steady at his side, his expression blank and professional and perfectly merciless. Caldwell stood, his carefully built network collapsing, his 23 years of institutional power evaporating in 90 seconds, and was escorted out past 40 witnesses, past cameras rolling, his career ending in the same conference room where he'd tried to end hers. The door closed behind him. Commander Harris approached Brooke first. His hand extended. "My son is alive because of you." "Thank you, Master Chief." The title hung in the air like a flag raising. Brooke shook his hand. For the first time in 3 months, she didn't have to hide. She didn't have to speak softly or step back from authority or accept someone else's dismissal of her competence. She could stand and look him in the eye and be exactly who she was. Marcus Webb approached next, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I didn't recognize you," he whispered. His voice was breaking. I carried your name for 18 years and I didn't recognize you in the hallway, Anne." "You weren't supposed to," Brooke said quietly. Her voice had changed. The years of suppression had lifted. It came out calm and steady and absolutely certain. That was the point. "I was erased. I had to be. I'm still technically dead according to the Pentagon." He pulled up his sleeve. There, wrapped around the muscle of his forearm just above where flesh met prosthetic, was a tattoo. Her call sign. An anchor. Her name in capitals. They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd survived something that officially never happened, that had no documentation, that lived only in their bodies and their memory and the invisible thread that connected soldiers who'd been through fire together. 6 months later, the late summer sun was setting over San Diego in shades of amber and rust. Brooke stood in Commander Harris's backyard watching his son, fully recovered, his hearing aids adjusted to a frequency that let him engage with the world in new ways, his hands learning the precise geometry of sign language, teach her daughter Mia how to sign hero. Ethan's small hands moved with fierce determination. Mia copied the motion, laughing, and Ethan signed it again, correcting her grip, patient and precise. The boy who'd nearly died 3 months ago was teaching other people how to recognize heroism. There was something almost impossibly beautiful about that mathematics. Brooke's combat boots sat in a shadow box on her apartment wall now, mounted behind glass with a small bronze placard, Ramadi, 2006 to 2010. Never forgotten. She didn't hide them anymore. She didn't hide anything. Marcus Webb was here too, tossing a baseball with his 7-year-old using his prosthetic hand, the movement smooth and practiced and ordinary. He wasn't a stranger in hallways anymore. He was what he'd always been, a brother in arms. Commander Harris handed her a cold beer and nodded toward the kids. He asks about you constantly. Wants to know your stories. Maybe when he's older, Brooke said, watching Ethan and Mia build a language between them, watching them construct meaning from silence and motion. Some stories aren't for kids. Fair enough. He paused, and she could sense him choosing his words carefully. Seattle General offered you the pediatric director position. Full authority. Your own staff. Double the salary. Brooke watched her daughter's hands moving, learning the grammar of another person's silence, building bridges across the spaces where other people saw only barriers. I start Monday, she said. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of iron and fire, Brooke allowed herself something that felt almost like peace. General Kensington's words echoed in her mind, something he'd said after the cameras stopped rolling, the ones who have seen the worst often give the most. She thought about Ramadi. About carrying Marcus through sand and fire. About the emergency surgery she'd performed with techniques learned in places most people never had to survive. About a boy waking up to a world that was still dangerous but was also alive, still full of language and connection and the possibility of being understood. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, ever hidden your true strength, ever watched someone try to destroy what you'd built, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever been misjudged by someone in power? How did you prove them wrong? We read every comment and we're building a community of people who refuse to be invisible.